Welcome to the Income Outcomes Show, a podcast publication part of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. The Income Outcomes Show is dedicated to pharmacists, pharmacy technicians, pharmacy students, and all pharmacy professionals interested in maximizing their income and providing insights into living a financially free lifestyle.
All matters discussed during this podcast are for informational purposes only. Opinions expressed herein are solely those of Waypoint Strategic Advisors, LLC, and our editorial staff. Material presented is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representations as to its accuracy or completeness. All information and ideas should be discussed in detail with your individual advisor prior to implementation. The presence of this podcast shall in no way be construed or interpreted as a solicitation to sell or offer to sell advisory services to anyone. Waypoint Strategic Advisors, LLC is not affiliated with or endorsed by any government agency and are not engaged in the practice of law. Content should not be viewed as an offer to buy or sell any of the securities mentioned or as legal or tax advice. You should always consult an attorney or tax professional regarding your specific legal or tax situation.
And now, here are your hosts of the Income Outcomes Show, Ben Coakley with Waypoint Strategic Advisors and Joe Castleman with Pharmacist Financial.
Pharmacy Podcast Network. This is your founder of the Pharmacy Podcast, Todd, and I am thrilled to finally bring you a podcast that I've been trying to work on now for about 2 years. And I've met several individuals in the profession of finance and counseling and just smarter people than me, most definitely. I want to welcome you to the newest segment of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, Income Outcomes Show. And we have two champions of income outcome and that subject matter, Mr. Benjamin Coakley with Waypoint RX and Joe Casselman with Pharmacist Financial. Gentlemen, welcome to the Income Outcomes Show, your show. I'm going to start with Ben. How are you guys doing today?
Doing well, Todd. Doing well here in beautiful Greenville, South Carolina.
Doing good here, too, in Texas.
Joe, what part of Texas are you from?
I'm currently in Dallas, Fort Worth area, but I was in Austin and spent a lot of time down there still.
Ben, I've seen you and your family, your dad, your brother. You guys have been entrenched in pharmacy for years. There's some of our listeners that might not know Waypoint, so I want some background. Who's Waypoint? Who are you? What are you guys about?
We are champions of the independent community pharmacy. And what I mean by that is we have, over the last 15, 20 years, have worked to provide some solutions that we feel are very important for the future long-term viability of community pharmacy. So my brother, Rick, my dad is Rick, my brother is Matt, and my mom, Marcia, she's actually in the business as well, along with we have 12 other employees. We have just dedicated our lives to ensuring that pharmacy owners and community pharmacists have the resources, particularly financial, to achieve the goals that they have. Because, Todd, one of the things that we see often is these pharmacy owners and pharmacists get to the end of their careers and their lives, and a lot of times they haven't had the advice needed to get them to where they need to be so they can successfully move into life after pharmacy.
What's interesting to me, Ben, and something that really proves the sincerity of Waypoint is your company is a reflection of the majority of your clients based on the fact that you guys are a family-owned business and you're helping out family-owned pharmacies. And you're even helping out micro chains and you're helping out other organizations and students. And so I'm excited about you being one of the two leaders on the Income Outcomes Show. Mr. Joe Castleman, give us a background on yourself and Pharmacist Financial.
Yeah, Pharmacist Financial actually started back in 2005 when I was dating a P1 at University of Texas in Austin College of Pharmacy. And they had an elective class, and the professor was asking what the students want to hear. And she at the time raised her hand and said, "Hey, how about financial?" So I got invited in and did my very first personal finance presentation or educational seminar for students. And from that point on, it just kind of blossomed and started speaking to many students, and then it started to go into the associations of pharmacists after they graduate. And then it started going to some owners, and then I just started kind of going from there. Like Ben said, I really like to focus on not only the life after pharmacy, but just what all this financial planning and decision making actually means to them. Because Ben said the other day, actually, we were talking, and he said, our clients and the people we talk to, they're much more than just numbers and dollar signs. And I think that's important, especially for the pharmacy owners that deal with numbers all day long. So I've been ingrained too, not quite as much as Ben over there, but I definitely have a lot of pharmacists that I've talked to and answered many similar questions, and you start to notice trends, and I can help people out quite a bit that way.
Joe,
Todd,
you've been on the Pharmacy Podcast before, way back in August of 2012.
Correct. And I couldn't find that the other day, by the way.
And Todd, I want to just add to something that Joe said there. When we look at pharmacists and pharmacy owners and just the people involved in this community, we see the people, and that's so important, because when pharmacy owners are looking at their patients, they see people, and we have to always keep in mind that we're here to serve people. We're not here to serve a number. We're not here to serve. Numbers are important. Don't get me wrong. But what's more important is that truly understanding that we are dealing with people, and if we can keep that in mind, then our services and the advice and quality advice that we give will always be valuable to them. And I think that's something that both Joe and I share. We share a passion for working with people and helping them achieve their goals. And I think that's something that we always have to keep in mind.
I agree, Ben. I was thinking about it the other day how one of the things I do love about the pharmacy profession is they truly care about their patients or the people that they impact. They're not just doing it for the money or other reasons. They're doing it because they care. It's a profession that take an oath. And it's similar to what you and I do, Ben. We really care about how we impact our clients and the people we talk to. So I think it's a really good fit.
So the Income Outcomes show is about pharmacies' futures. It's about their financial health. It's about the pharmacy tech. It's about how can we counsel and give ideas at a high level and build these summaries of these topics that we know that a pharmacy professional is dealing with. Here's some shocking information. The National Pharmacist Workforce Survey said that pharmacists with less than 5 years of experience reported graduating with an average of $108,000 in student debt. So one of the facets of the Income Outcomes show is going to be looking at the beginning of your career. It's going to be looking at the middle of your career. It's going to be looking at sunset of your career. And these gentlemen are going to guide us through many facets of the complexity of financial astuteness and health. And you're not going to get advice from me, people, because I'll just lead you to bankruptcy. So we're going to listen to Joe and Ben.
I think you're selling yourself a little bit short there, Todd. Just throwing that out there.
What other ideas do you guys have for the Income Outcomes show?
Well, I'd like to just follow up on what you kind of said about the student loans. A lot of student loans I've seen. And just over this past summer, I had a handful of clients that each individually or their family hit the $1 million net worth milestone. And all these pharmacists had graduated between 5 and 7 or 8 years ago. And I remember when I was working with them right when they graduated, and they couldn't fathom that they would have $1 million net worth anytime soon. And so I think what we provide is helping them look forward, and it's definitely achievable. All the financial stuff that any pharmacist wants is definitely achievable. It's just you got to get going.
Yeah, and to add to that, Joe, absolutely. There still is plenty of opportunity in this marketplace. If you want to be an owner, you can be an owner. You know, my beautiful wife is in pharmacy school right now. She's a P3, and so she really likes the hospital aspect of pharmacy. So there is a tremendous amount of opportunity, and with the resources that pharmacists are typically blessed with, you know, there is opportunity to achieve the goals that they want. And back to the topics, I think Joe and I actually did some brainstorming. We met a couple of weeks ago and sat down and said, hey, you know, what do we want this podcast to look like, and what do we feel would be the most valuable for people who listen to it? And one of the things that we talked about was keeping it simple, but also keeping it at a high level, and then diving down, you know, into certain topics. And so one of the ideas that we had was to go over, like, how to evaluate advice. How do you evaluate whether you're getting good advice or not? Believe it or not, there are ways and there are things that you can do to evaluate the advisors you have on your team. So I think that was one of the topics. Joe, what were the other ones?
There were several we talked about. There was one about the value of money, or the value of a dollar.
Yeah, I think it was like, what is the definition of money?
Yeah.
You know, what is the true definition?
Yeah.
And understanding just some basic formulas when you're trying to make financial decisions, how to evaluate the actual cost to you as a human being in dollars. And you know, and I think that's a real big one, because when we talk to our clients about that, it's kind of eye-opening. And let me give you a good example of that. So if you make $100,000 a year, if you're working full-time making $100,000, and you want to buy a $500,000 house, that means you're going to have to basically give up 5 years of your life working. That's not including taxes. That's not including any of these other things. You're going to have to give up 5 years of your life. Now, when you're 25 years old, just out of school, 5 years may not mean much to you. I think it should, but it may not. When you're 55 years old or 60 years old, you start thinking a little bit more about time. And maybe it's not worth investing 5 years of your time to earn an income to buy a $500,000 house in this example. So those are the types of topics I think that are really pertinent, because if you can take what we're hoping to help you understand here and apply it to your life, then we feel we have done our job on this show.
Ben, I agree. I think whether this is a single topic or a theme, the idea of making decisions and financial decisions specifically, and like you just said, you know, what decisions, what are they costing you? And I think you can apply that to almost any financial decision you're faced with. And take it a step further, you know, when I say cost you, what does it cost you to make this decision, the house versus not the house? There's obviously the numbers, the dollars, and we have all kinds of fancy software and we can calculate all kinds of stuff. But there's also the non-dollars, the effects of the decision that are beyond money, the happiness, the family, etc. I always kind of think of it in terms of whenever you're making a decision, there's two sides to it. There's the economics of the decision, and then there's the emotions of the decision. Both are important, but both have to be in check as well. A good example would be an emotional side. People get out of school or they start working and they need to have emergency savings, some kind of cushion. And you'll be amazed. You ask 10 people or 100 people, 100 pharmacists, how much they should have in emergency savings. And you'll get ranges everything from $5,000 to $250,000. Well, economically, we can come up with an objective number that fits their situation. But on the emotional side, they're working from that framework, and that can drastically affect their outcome. The one that needs the $250,000 before they can sleep well at night, that's going to affect their other decisions. And so I think it's good to look at the effects, the cost of decisions on both levels, both sides.
And I would say, and I would add to that, Joe, that The emotional side is the side that's often overlooked.
Yes.
In this thing. There is something, you know, I heard a great commercial the other day, and it said, your most important number in your life is 8. So it kind of got my attention, and it said 8 hours of sleep. Mm. And we're working with a gentleman out of Texas right now, and he is actually quantifying and studying the longevity of life. And the primary factor for living a long life is 8 hours of sleep a night. And I think that's an interesting thing. So a lot of times when it comes to the emotion and managing the emotion of this, and do not get me wrong, every financial decision you make is based on emotion. And there's 3 emotions. There's fear, there's pleasure, and there's greed. And when you're making decisions based on one of those emotions, and that primary emotion is driving the decision-making process, we're not saying, and I'm not saying that that's a good thing or a bad thing. What I'm saying is it's important to understand the emotion. And if you understand it, then you can actually say, does this actually make sense for me where I am now? And is it going to lead me to my long-term goals? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no, in my opinion. So you have to factor that in. So, Joe, that's a great point that people don't really ever think about, because people aren't trained to think that way. But it is a part. Make no mistake about it. It is a part of every decision that you make.
I agree. Another area that we didn't necessarily talk about, but a theme or a topic, is the idea of giving back. And I'm not necessarily referring only to like philanthropic endeavors when you're later in life and you've got millions of dollars, but you know, the regular pharmacist that's working down at the Walgreens, you know, how can they give back financially in various ways? And just whether or not they do a certain thing or not, just that mindset, that kind of having that gratitude of, hey, you know, we do make a great amount of money, especially if there's dual pharmacist income, which is very common. And just being aware and grateful that you've got a powerful resource, your income, and you can do almost anything you want with it. You can also squander it, to be honest. I've seen that happen, unfortunately. Or people that just wait too long. They buy the BMW right out of school, the $500,000 house, like you said. So
I think that goes to the point that, you know, we have a saying at our company that, you know, money is not evil. It's the love of money that's evil. And money is a tool. Money is a tool, and it can be used for powerful, unbelievable, life-changing things for people, or it can lead to the ultimate destruction of something. And depending on your mindset, our challenge is to help you understand that money is just a tool for you to use to achieve your goals, but it also can be tremendously impactful for you to give back and make a big difference in people's lives. We have a client here in South Carolina, and he has single-handedly put at least 20 people, young people from his community, through pharmacy school. He's paid for their entire education. So I was sitting down. He's one of our first Pharmacy Hunter clients. And I was sitting down with him, and I said, "Hey, you know, why do you do that?" And he said, "Ben," he said, have you ever driven around my community?" And I said, "No, sir, I never really have taken the time." He goes, "Take the time when you leave here. Take the time. And I want you to call me on your cell phone when you're back on the interstate, back heading to your house, and tell me what you saw." So I get out of his pharmacy. I get in my car, and I rode around. And what I saw was unbelievable. I never actually took the time to understand that this community wasn't very affluent. It was a very, very poor community. And this particular gentleman had the opportunity to change 20 people's lives that never would have had that opportunity. And he did it because he felt that it was his responsibility to take care of the community that had taken care of him and his family for so long. So, Joe, that goes back to the thought of, how do we do it? How do we develop a mindset of giving back? And then how do we do it? How do we actually go out and start the process and learn where to find the resources to be able to give back to the community. I think that's a great topic.
Ben, that just made me think of something that relates to that. What you just said is the topic and what we all should be doing, regardless of what stage we're at, is setting goals. I mean, financial planning 101 is you got to set goals and to know where you're headed. And I think that a lot of times the goals can be very useful or they can be, kind of weak. The useful ones are the ones that maybe the goal is something bigger than themselves that they can attain to. There's, the goal is like just buying the car. That's fine. But the goal is of really wanting to reach a certain level and be able to give back and whatnot. So I think actually, and that ties into something I was thinking about earlier is, a lot of times when I've talked to pharmacists, especially younger or, pharmacists that freshly out of school or students, they want to know the exact initial steps. And, for each person, the steps they take towards any goal are going to be slightly different, but there's going to be in general the first couple steps for any financial decision or goal that they're trying to achieve that are common, or at least a way that they can get going. And so I think talking about whether we're talking about student loans or any kind of thing, be able to say, hey, take these first 2 steps to get you going. And then from there, it may be different for each person. But give the pharmacist audience, at least a couple practical steps that they can use or think about later.
Yeah, so, I think that's a good idea, Joe, because that is one of the big questions that we get is, okay, I'm done with school. Where do I go? Where do I go from here? Joe, I mean, what do you normally recommend, Joe, for somebody straight out of school? They're staring $100,000 of student loan debt in the face, and they kind of don't know. When you're 24, 25, if they're anything like me, they don't have a clue what they want to do with themselves. So they're staring at student loan. They know they're going to get paid fairly well for when they get into a job at that point, but it may not be their ultimate, landing spot for their career. I mean, what do you recommend for somebody like that?
Good question. I think taking a step back in order to answer that, and when I work with clients as well, is it's very important for me and for them to know where they're coming from, the perspective. And I usually like to ask them or help them and help us discover what their dangers are, their fears when it comes to money, their opportunities, and then their strengths. So, for example, if I meet with somebody and one of their strengths financially is that they're really good savers. Well, knowing that, I can say, okay, the problem with them is not going to be, or the challenge is not going to be saving or setting enough aside. It may just be, where should we optimally put that? Contrast that with the one that says, I can't save, I'm just a spender. Well, that allows me to look at it and say, okay, well, here are some steps that you should take. But as kind of a general rule, I really think the value of just putting down on paper, say, okay, here's how much money I bring in, whether you do it each year or each paycheck, and just literally having a place where each dollar is going to go, knowing where every single dollar is currently going and where you want it to go. And I hate to use the term budget because it's got a negative connotation for some people, but just knowing where every dollar is most useful really, really helps gain clarity for them. And so it's as simple as just writing down what you have and then listing all the things that you have as far as expenses. And then the main thing for most new graduates, obviously the debt. In an ideal world, they would be able to save 90% of their income and get out of it in a couple of years. But reality is they can't do that. But they can save a good amount. So I really think taking a look at the debt and saying what is feasible as far as paying that down. Some people say, how aggressively can you pay that down and as quickly as possible? And you have some people that say, I just want to stretch it out forever. I think there's a middle ground, but trying to figure out what that is. And really, for me as the advisor, I want to make sure they're balancing their debt payment with their wealth building or savings. I think that's very key. being able to do both, or at least have money going into each one. So that, again, the initial steps would be really take a look at your income, because the income is the most valuable asset when you're right out of school. You don't have a lot of assets. You probably have negative assets, but the income is the number one asset that you do have, or they have. And so really knowing where every dollar is going and where it should go, I think that's step number one for sure.
Joe, that advice is very sage advice. And one of the reasons most of our clients, they do not build the wealth that they want until they're truly out of debt. So there's a lot of advice in the marketplace that says pay off your debts first, then save second, or stretch out your debt and pay it off in an optimal time frame. What we have found is the truth is somewhere probably in the middle, like it is with most things. So we help people understand you've got to come up with a plan to aggressively pay off your debt. But at the same time, let's not forget, if you're working with somebody with a 401k, let's get the match. Let's don't leave top dollars on the table. Those will add up. And in 40 years, those will add up pretty significantly. So I think it's a combination. The other thing that I would say out of that is, Joe, that goes back to the emotion.
Yeah.
There are some people that we speak with. It doesn't matter if I want them to build wealth at 25 years old, it's just not going to happen, because they are so emotionally, it just scares the living daylights out of them to have all that debt. Their focus, as soon as they get out of school, is getting out of debt. And that is going to be every extra dollar they make is going to pay off that debt, because they're one particular person said, "Hey, I'm allergic to debt," and it paralyzes me. I'm terrified when I sleep at night. I'm thinking about that $100,000 note that I owe. And so I think, Joe, it goes back to the emotion too, understanding the emotions of these decisions. And once again, it goes back to that 8 hours of sleep at night. That's so important. So that's all I have.
Yeah. And the emotions ties into when I help clients find that balance between debt and savings. I'm looking for whatever's going to give them the most momentum, because whenever you have the most momentum, things get done and goals get accomplished. And so I kind of view it as there's an emotional rate of return, if you will, that we want to maximize.
Gentlemen, I'm extremely excited about the Income Outcomes show and the value that you're going to be bringing to the Pharmacy Podcast Network and all of our listeners. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to both of you for committing to this show. I want the listeners to reach out to you both. If they have questions, we're going to have ways of linking up to you in the show notes. But I just want to say thank you to both of you.
Thank you, Todd.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. We can't wait to help people with these topics. And this is one way that we get to serve others in our businesses.
That's right. You were listening to the Income Outcomes show, part of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, and we thank you for listening.
Interested in learning more about maximizing your income and living a financially free lifestyle? Contact the Income Outcomes show today to learn more about your financial possibilities and best practices in managing your money to create opportunities for lasting wealth. Go to pharmacypodcast.com under the contact section and send us a message, and we'll get back to you within 24 hours. Thanks for listening to the Income Outcomes Show, a podcast publication part of the Pharmacy Podcast Network.